Hi, in today's video I'm going to be talking about setting up a split VPN on Freebsd. Normally when you have a VPN connected, all your traffic goes through the VPN. When you have a split VPN set up, it allows you to have two routing tables so that you can send your internet traffic through your regular connection or the VPN. And this also allows you to set individual applications either on the command line or GUI applications to use the VPN or the regular connection. Now, normally when you're not connected to a VPN and you use a service like What's My IP, it will show your IP address. You can also use services like DNS leak test to check your location and run an extended test. Let me just enable JavaScript. And it will basically check the servers that you're using and where your connection is based. Let me just stop that now. Okay, well, it's still going. Another tool you can use is the DNSSEC resolver to check your DNS. So if I just check that, you can see I'm using the DNSSEC resolver. The other thing I want to show you is how you can check your public IP address on the command line, so that I can show you how you can set terminal programs to either run through your normal connection or the VPN. Check public IP address. So there's a couple of articles here about how you can check your command line and your external IP address. So what I'll just do is use this address here. Basically what this does is it uses the curl command and checks your public IP address on the command line. So if I just open up a terminal and paste that in, you'll see there that that's my public IP address. But what I'm going to do now is come across and start a VPN connection, which will then set up two routing tables. So I'm just going to use a script I wrote to set up the VPN connection that I'll show you as I go on. Basically what I'm doing is I'm passing in some variables. I'm passing in the authentication for the VPN connection from a text file, and then I'm passing in the configuration file for the VPN. Okay, we can see there that the VPN has now connected. So if I come back here to the web browser and just refresh, you'll see my IP address is still the same as it was before, because this is using the first routing table to go out the normal connection. What I'm going to do now is open up the browser, but what I've done is created a duplicate desktop entry that I've modified that is set to route Firefox traffic down the VPN connection. So the normal desktop launcher for Firefox is just Firefox web browser, but I've duplicated that and edited the file. And what this does is it launches Firefox in the second routing table using the setfib command. So what's my IP? Just come down here. And you can see now we're in New York here. What I can also do is the same thing. What I'll do is I'll run the curl command here, and you can see that's my public IP address going through the first routing table. If I prefix that command with setfib1, that's going to run the curl command in the second routing table, which goes down the VPN connection. So you can see there that I have a completely different IP address. So that's the first routing table, and that's the second routing table. We can have a look at the routing tables here with the netstack command, and we can see the default gateway here for the first routing table. If I run the same command and prefix it with setfib1 to run that command in the second routing table, you'll see that the gateway is a different IP address. And basically the way that you do this is by setting up the bootloader.conf. Let me just increase the size of that there. And what am I looking for? It's the netfibs here down at the bottom. Basically the net.fibs equals 2 sets up 2 routing tables on Freebsd. Now once you've edited the bootloader config file and added this, you actually need to reboot the system for this to have any effect. Once we've done that, that will set up 2 routing tables on the system. The next thing that you want to do is actually set up a PF file, a firewall file on Freebsd. So if I come across to my configuration files, the PF file here. In my firewall configuration, I have the internal interface set, some variables which are configured for the VPN connection. When you start OpenVPN, it creates a ton0 VPN interface. So I've got some configuration here for my PF configuration file for various ports that I want open, for the torrents and different services that I'm running. And then down here at the bottom, what I'm doing is you can load anchors from within PF within the PF firewall. So when I start up a script to launch the VPN connection, I actually run a PF configuration file that loads command that loads a anchor that opens some ports and stuff in the firewall. So what I'll do is I'll come across and go through some different options that you've got set for networking in FreeBSD. The DH. This is the DH client enter hooks. That's in the, let's see, that's in the etc. Directory, and basically this is just setting it so that the resolve file doesn't sort of get overwritten automatically to alter your custom setup. And what else have I got here that you need to set? The resolve configuration file, yeah. So basically this is set to use the unbound local DNS cacher, and what this allows you to do is block sites using DNS, and also you can set it so that the queries either go down your normal routing table or the VPN interface, so you can actually set up unbound to use a particular network interface. So what I do is when I start up my VPN, I actually set unbound to use the ton0 VPN interface so that all my DNS queries go down the VPN in the split tunnel. So that's setting up the resolve configuration file, and in unbound, which is the local DNS caching server, what I have here is a couple of configuration files, unbound add servers, and that's basically a list of DNS domains to block, and what it does is it redirects them to localhost, so that instead of going out to the internet, it just says, no, this site's running on localhost. So for instance, I block DNS, crypto miners, and also block Facebook. And I mention that because I'll show you that when I'm connected to the VPN, Facebook's actually blocked. So you can see that it's using the local DNS caching server over the VPN. So that's the outgoing that's the ad servers I'm blocking and sites. And then what I have here is a file called unbound outgoing interface. And this configuration file here is just blank at the moment. So by default, what happens is that's blank. But when I connect to the VPN, what I do is I actually add the IP address of the VPN's endpoint into this file, so that Unbound then sends its queries over that IP address. So if I come into the configuration file for, here's the forward file. This is the forward.conf file, and basically what I'm doing here is I'm forwarding the address to the port 5353, which is what I'm using with DNS, what's it called? DNS proxy, I forget the name of it, DNS crypt, there it's written at the top. So that's to sort of secure your DNS. And here's the unbound config, and basically this is got a selection in here saying include these files, so it's including the ad servers to block, so it blocks everything there. And you can see here this line, unbound outgoing interfaces, is commented out. And basically what I do is in the script I use to launch the VPN, I actually toggle this line, uncomment it and comment it again. So by default it's commented out, so that the DNS queries are going through the standard first route of the IP table, the routing table. And then when I start the VPN connection, I uncomment this line so that it uses the outgoing interface, and in that file that will have the IP address of the VPN endpoint. So that's how I sort of set stuff up at the back end. And what I'll just go through now is the actual sort of scripts I'm using to set up the VPN connection. Just come down here, VPN split route. Okay, and so basically this is a script I use to launch the VPN using the configuration file. In my case, I'm using private internet access, and what I do is I have a script here that's basically starts off with usage, so that if you run the script with a -h, it prints out the sort of usage of the script. And basically I pass in the configuration file, the OpenVPN configuration file, and also a text file that has got the authentication with the username and the password on separate lines, so that I basically run the script with the -c option and the path to the OpenVPN configuration file, and the -a option and the path to the authentication file. And basically this is just some error messages that I created, that if you run the script with the wrong options, or you don't run it as root, it will print out an error. So first of all, we check if the script is run as root by checking the UID is equal to 0. If not, it prints the usage and the error. And then we check the number of arguments passed to the script. So it needs to be passed the configuration file and the authentication file. And then after that, what we use is getops, and what this does is it's a built-in function with the shell, and what it does is it allows you to configure options that you pass to the script. So like -C for the configuration file, -A for the authentication file. And basically what you do is you define the options up here that you're going to be enabling, like -C, -A for the authentication, and -H for help. And these correspond to these sections down here. So you can see here what we have is -C in this case statement is the C option here. And what we're doing is we're saying this variable config is equal to the opt arg. And what that means is the argument after the -C option. So when you run the script and you run -C and then give it a OpenVPN configuration file, the config variable is going to be equal to that. So config is going to store the name of the configuration file that you pass to it. And then the next line down, I'm actually checking if the config argument is actually a file. And if it isn't, then I run the usage script function that displays the help. And then in the auth, I'm doing the same thing. After the -A, the opt arg is going to be equal to whatever you pass to it. So the configuration file. So auth is going to be set to the location of the authentication file. And again, we check if that is actually a file or not. And if it isn't, we exit and print the help message. And the -H option equals the help down here. So after that, down at the bottom, what we have is the OpenVPN code that actually starts the VPN connection. And what we're doing is we're setting like authentication, no cache, root no pull. So I think it doesn't try and pull roots and stuff from the server. And the important one down here is script security 2. And what this allows you to do is set up and down VPN scripts so that you can run a script when the VPN comes up, and you can run a script when the VPN goes down. So when you kill the VPN, basically, so when you start the VPN, it will run a script after it's started, and then when you stop the VPN, it'll then run another script. So what these are the up and down scripts. So I'll show you the script that I launch when I start the VPN and when I stop the VPN. And then the other two options down here are config and author use pass. And the config is the configuration file for the VPN that we're launching. It's the OVPN file. So that config is equal to the config up here that's being passed after the -C option. So that's the configuration file. And again, the auth file is the authentication file that we're passing after the -A option. So what we want to do is have a look at the up and down scripts. So if I just kill that, and got OVPN, OpenVPN up split and down split. So this is the script that's launched after I start the VPN. And what I'm doing here is actually setting the routes manually in the second route table. So this is basically getting the network interfaces details and then adding those into the second routing table. So it's getting all the details of the VPN configuration, and it's adding the endpoint for the VPN into the second configuration table. And what I have down here is some firewall rules that basically open up different ports and stuff when I start the VPN, allow traffic through using the OpenVPN anchor that I had set in the PF configuration file. And then down here, what I'm doing is this section here is I'm echoing the ton0's VPN IP address into the unbound outgoing interface file. So the unbound DNS server, the configuration file, I'm echoing the IP address in a certain format that unbound will understand. And then in the second bit down here, what I'm doing is I'm uncommenting that section in the unbound configuration file where it said include outgoing interface. So what I'm doing is basically echoing the VPN's outgoing interface IP address into a configuration file, and then in unbound I'm uncommenting a comment which then will include that file and that IP address. I then set do a sleep for a second, and then I stop local unbound, which is the DNS server, and then what I do is I start unbound in the second routing table by using setfib 1 before starting the service. And then again, what I was doing previously was actually using Dante proxy server as well. That's another way you can do it. You can use the Dante proxy server and basically set it up so that you can use a local SOCKS server, and it will then route all the traffic down the VPN. But what I'm doing now is just using desktop configuration files to launch applications either in the VPN or just through the regular route. So that's the up script, and the down script, what it does, first of all, it starts off, it removes the PF anchor for the VPN, and then what I do is I uncomment the include outgoing interfaces in unbound, and then I clear the unbound outgoing interface file by echoing nothing into it so that there's no IP address in it. So after that, I then sleep for a second. I then stop the unbound server in the second routing table, and then after that I restart it back in the original routing table. And basically what that allows me to do is I can local share applications. What I've got here is, this is the regular sort of launcher for sort of Firefox. I think actually that's maybe an old one. Let me check, but let me just double check that. Yeah, that was an old one. By default, you will have as user share. I think it's you have desktop launchers, user local share applications. Yeah. In your user local share applications directory on Freebsd, this is where desktop launchers are stored, which are basically little text files that specify how an application will launch, and it will show up in your application launcher, whether it's something like Rofi or any other sort of desktop launcher. So these are the default desktop launchers. So you can see I've got Firefox desktop here. So what I've done is simply copied that Firefox desktop file to, let me come back here, to local share applications. So I've copied that and I've renamed it vpn-firefox.desktop. And in this file, basically what I've done is just make a couple of modifications, and I've just renamed this to Firefox VPN browser. And the other thing I did down here is normally it will just say exe equals Firefox. What I do is I prefix that with setfib1. So what happens is when I launch Rofi, if I type Firefox, you can see down here at the bottom, we have Firefox web browser, and that's the default desktop configuration file in user local share applications. And then we have this second one, which is Firefox VPN browser, and that's this configuration file. And what that does is, using the setfib command, it then launches Firefox in the second routing table. So I can do the same thing for my BitTorrent application. So this is the configuration file for BitTorrent, and what you can see down here is the same thing. I'm just prefixing the BitTorrent command with setfib1, and the other thing that you need to do is actually change the name. So this is BitTorrent VPN Connection. So when I start Rofi, if I type qbit, you can see here I've got two desktop launchers listed for BitTorrent. So I can either launch it regularly like this, which will launch it in the first routing table going out my default connection, or I can run it over the VPN connection, which starts it using the setfib1 command and then routes all the traffic through the second routing table, so that it's not coming out my public IP address. So again, this is what's my IP running. Let's run DNS leak test. So this is Firefox running in the second routing table. So if I come across, I can launch Chrome. DNS leak test. I was going to come and say, okay, there we go. Okay, so you can see Chromium is running through the first routing table, so I have a different IP address. As if I come across to wherever Firefox is, getting mixed up with my Windows. Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry. They all look the same there for a minute. So you can see here Firefox is running in the second routing table, or I can start it regularly, Firefox web browser, DNS leak test. And that's coming through the regular connection. As I said, the trick is basically either using the local share applications, either using desktop launchers and modifying them by changing the name. You need to change the name so it shows up with a different name, and then just prefixing it with the setfib1 command to launch it in the second routing table. And see if I've got that. Yeah, so, and again on the command line, normally when I run that, it's just going to come out the first routing table and my public IP address. So ifconfig.co is a site that will actually show your public IP address that you can access using curl. But if I prefix that with setfib1, you'll see that's now going through the second routing table. And you can see that's the second routing table with the gateway set there. Whereas if I run that command, get back to oh, there it was. The regular gateway would be coming out here, but prefixing that with setfib1 will show you the gateways coming out here. So basically what that means is I've got two gateways. I have my two routing tables, and I have my public IP address in the first routing table, and the second is the VPN routing table, and that basically allows you to send applications either through the regular connection or the VPN connection by using the setfib command and setting up desktop launchers for GUI applications so that you can easily launch GUI applications either regularly or in the VPN, and the same for things like BitTorrent, so you can have it coming out the VPN connection or just your regular connection if it's just an ISO file for an operating system like Linux or FreeBSD that you're downloading. So that's how you can set up a split VPN on FreeBSD and use. Let me just open up Firefox, because one thing I forgot to show you was it should be blocking Facebook over the unable to connect. So you can see there that, as I mentioned previously, I'm using unbound to block certain domains, and Facebook is one of those. So you can see that the unbound local DNS server is being used over the VPN connection because it's still blocking Facebook there. So that's basically how you can set up a split VPN on FreeBSD and use it with a VPN and use it with DNSSEC and ad blocking and pfSense, the PF firewall, so that you can actually send particular applications either on the command line or GUI applications through either your regular connection or the VPN connection.